The light returns. The storm broke on a night heavy with rain. Thunder rolled across the hills as if the heavens themselves were impatient to see the truth revealed. The Carter estate, lit by the occasional flare of lightning, looked less like a palace and more like a fortress under siege. Maya had spent the entire day working with her heart in her throat, aware that the thin veil of secrecy protecting her was nearly gone. Mrs. Chamberlain's eyes followed her with the persistence of a predator. Isabella's voice carried an edge that bled through every falsely sweet word, and even the staff had begun to avoid her as though she were cursed. It was only Ava's steady gaze, clear and focused despite the drops forced upon her days earlier, that gave Maya the strength to keep moving. Dr. Havers had sent word that very afternoon through a trusted errand boy. The vial Maya had given him was not medicine at all, but a carefully concocted solution laced with chemicals strong enough to dilate and paralyze the eyes when used over time. It would not heal, it would destroy. The child's blindness was not nature's cruelty, but man's design, a deliberate act to keep her in darkness. The letter with his findings was tucked deep inside Maya's apron pocket, its folded edges damp with the sweat of her palm. It was the weapon she had been waiting for, though she knew brandishing it too soon could cost her everything. The confrontation came sooner than she had expected. That evening, Isabella called for Ava to be brought into the great hall. The chandeliers blazed with light reflecting off the marble floors until the room seemed to glow unnaturally bright. Mr. Carter sat at the head of the long dining table, sipping his drink with distracted impatience. Isabella stood behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder, her figure statuesque in a gown the color of blood. Chamberlain hovered nearby, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp. The atmosphere was suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes a performance carefully staged. Maya guided Ava into the room, her hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. She felt the child trembling beneath her touch, yet her chin lifted with quiet defiance. Isabella's smile did not reach her eyes as she gestured gracefully. "Darling, Mr. Carter wishes to see his daughter." "Isn't that right, dear?" Mr. Carter's gaze softened briefly as he looked at Ava, though his expression carried the faint detachment of a man unaccustomed to intimacy. "Of course. I hardly see you these days, Ava. Your stepmother says your treatments keep you resting. How are you, my girl?" Ava opened her mouth and faltered. Maya felt her hesitation, the weight of fear pressing down on her. In that moment, Maya made her choice. She stepped forward, pulling the folded letter from her apron. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Sir, with all respect, you need to know the truth. Ava is not sick. She is not blind. She has been made blind by those drops that do not heal but poison. I have proof. A doctor has analyzed them." The room froze. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating Isabella's face as her smile dropped, replaced by a flash of cold fury. Mr. Carter blinked in disbelief, his brow furrowing as though he had misheard. Chamberlain took a step forward, her voice sharp as a knife. "She lies. She oversteps her place, sir. She has always been meddlesome." Maya's hands shook, but she thrust the letter forward. "Read it, see for yourself. These chemicals are designed to paralyze the eyes. And I have witnessed Ava's sight return when the drops were withheld. Ask her yourself. She can see." All eyes turned to the child. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, thick as the storm outside. Then Ava lifted her chin and spoke, her voice clear despite the tremor in it. "It's true, Father. I can see. Not always clear, not always far, but I see colors, shapes, light. I see your face now looking at me. And I remember when Mama said the world was beautiful. She told me never to let anyone steal my light. But they have tried. They've tried every day." Her words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Mr. Carter rose to his feet, his face pale. He turned to his wife, disbelief twisting into something darker. "Isabella, is this true?" Isabella laughed, a brittle sound. "Nonsense. The girl is confused, manipulated by a servant who clearly doesn't know her place. You cannot believe this absurd story." But Ava stepped forward, her small hands balled into fists. "It's not a story. You've kept me in the dark so you could keep everything else. You told me I was broken, but I'm not. You lied." The force of her words silenced even Chamberlain. Mr. Carter's gaze wavered between his daughter and his wife, torn between loyalty and truth. Finally, his eyes fell upon the letter in his hand, the words written in Dr. Havers' unmistakable script. The color drained from his face. "This," he whispered, his voice breaking, This cannot be. All these years. Isabella's mask cracked then, her beauty curdling into something cruel. You fool, she spat. You never wanted the burden of a sick child, so I gave you what you wanted. A symbol, a reason to keep her locked away while I cared for everything else. And you let me. You were too blind to see what was right in front of you. Mr. Carter staggered back as though struck. Ava clutched Maya's hand, her body trembling, but her eyes never left her stepmother's. In that moment, the child no longer looked like a victim, but like a warrior finally stepping into her light. The confrontation ended not with shouts, but with silence heavy as stone. Mr. Carter's voice, when it came, was low and final. Get out, Isabella. You and Edna both. Leave this house and never return. Chamberlain stiffened, her face pale with fury, but Isabella's scream cut through the hall before she could speak. You'll regret this! You'll see what happens when you betray me. But even as her threats echoed, her power dissolved like mist. The servants who had once feared her now turned away, unwilling to meet her eyes. Her reign had ended, her strings cut, her illusions shattered. When the doors slammed shut behind them, the house seemed to exhale. The storm outside softened, rain giving way to a calmer night. And in the great hall, for the first time in years, Ava stood unchained. She looked at her father, her eyes shimmering with tears. Do you see me now? Mr. Carter's face crumpled, his hands trembling as he pulled her into his arms. Yes, my girl. For the first time I see you. Maya turned away, her own eyes burning. It was not her moment, but she felt the weight lift from her chest. The battle she had fought in silence finally bearing fruit. She thought of Ava's mother, of the journal hidden under pillows and the whispered warnings written in ink and hope. Justice had come, late but not too late. In the weeks that followed, the estate changed. The heavy curtains were drawn back to let in sunlight. Ava's laughter filled the halls once silent. Doctors came. Not those Isabella had chosen, but trusted ones who confirmed that with time her vision could heal further. The staff relaxed, their steps lighter, their smiles genuine. And Mr. Carter, humbled and shaken, began the slow process of rebuilding the bond he had nearly lost forever. For Maya, life also shifted. Mr. Carter offered her a position far beyond a maid, one that would ensure she and Ava would never again be powerless. But titles mattered little to her. What mattered was that she had kept her promise, that she had not let fear silence her this time. She had stood against wealth, against cruelty, against shadows that had seemed impenetrable. And she had won. One evening, as the sun set over the gardens, Ava sat beside Maya, her eyes fixed on the sky painted in gold and crimson. She leaned against her with a soft sigh. It's beautiful, isn't it? The light always comes back. Maya wrapped an arm around her, her heart swelling. Yes, sweetheart. No matter how long the night, the light always returns. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and truth, Maya knew that the story of the Carter estate had changed forever. It was no longer the tale of a blind child trapped by lies, but of a girl who had fought her way back into the sun, guided by the courage of a woman who had once been afraid to speak. It was no longer a tragedy. It was a triumph. Fire in the shadows. The Carter estate had always carried a certain heaviness, a weight pressed into its marble floors and silk curtains, as though generations of wealth and ambition had left behind invisible stains. But in those weeks after Ava's collapse, the atmosphere grew more suffocating than ever. The staff moved like shadows, their faces drawn, their voices hushed, as though some unspoken storm gathered over their heads. Mrs. Chamberlain's sharp eyes seemed to pierce every corner, and Isabella's presence was like frost creeping along the walls. Beautiful to behold, but deadly to the touch. For Maya, each day felt like walking a tightrope over fire. One slip of her tongue, one wrong glance, and the world she had begun to build with Ava would collapse into ruin. Yet she could no longer afford to be timid. Ava's small body, trembling in her arms, poisoned by the drops, had burned the fear out of her and replaced it with a flame she could not extinguish. Silence was no longer an option. If she was going to save Ava, if she was going to honor the words scrawled in her late mother's journal, she had to move from observation to action. And so, under the cover of night, Maya began to fight back. The first risk was small but dangerous enough to set her heart racing. One evening, as she collected the trays from the family's dinner, she slipped a fresh vial of the eye drops into the folds of her apron. It was a simple motion, practiced and calm, but inside she felt as though the walls themselves were watching. She carried the vial back to her quarters, tucking it beneath the false bottom of her sewing box. The next day, under the guise of running errands in the village, she carried the vial in her pocket and sought out an old acquaintance, Dr. Leonard Havers, a retired physician who still lived quietly in town. He had once treated her when she was a girl, and though she feared the questions he might ask, desperation outweighed hesitation. Dr. Havers studied the vial carefully, his bushy brows knitting together. "Strange," he murmured, tilting the bottle against the light. "No prescription label, no pharmacy markings. Do you know what this is?" Maya kept her voice steady, though her palms dampened with sweat. "Something given to a child I care for. I need to know what's inside." He promised to examine it discreetly, though he warned it might take time. Maya left his home with her heart still pounding, aware that each step she took was a step further into danger. But as she walked back toward the estate, the first sparks of hope flickered inside her. For the first time, she was not alone in carrying the truth. Back at the mansion, however, suspicion thickened. Mrs. Chamberlain's eyes lingered too long whenever Maya passed, and Isabella's questions about Ava's care grew sharper, more pointed. "You spend an unusual amount of time in her room," she remarked one morning, her tone deceptively casual. "A maid should know her place. Children do not need confidants. They need order." Maya bowed her head, murmuring agreement, but inside she seethed. Order to Isabella meant obedience at all costs. Order meant silence. Order meant Ava chained to blindness while Isabella tightened her grip on the Carter fortune. And yet, for all her cruelty, Isabella had begun to show cracks. Maya noticed how her voice sharpened when speaking to Mr. Carter, how her hands tightened around her glass of wine when Ava smiled too brightly in her presence, how her eyes narrowed whenever Maya entered the room. Control was her lifeline, and control was slipping. One evening, Maya found herself drawn once more to the library. She had always loved books, and in that quiet sanctuary lined with leather-bound volumes, she felt safer. But safety was an illusion. As she moved along the shelves, dusting absent-mindedly, she overheard voices in the adjoining study. The heavy doors muffled them, but the words carried enough to freeze her blood. "She grows suspicious," Isabella hissed. "The maid. She watches too closely, asks too few questions. That silence is dangerous." Mrs. Chamberlain's reply was steady, as though reciting a plan already in motion. "I will handle her. Perhaps she will make a mistake. They always do. And when she does, she will be gone." Maya pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow. It was not paranoia. They were already plotting her removal. She had only a small window left, a narrow space of time to gather the evidence she needed before Isabella and her enforcer struck first. That night, unable to sleep, Maya crept to Ava's room. The child was awake, her pale eyes glimmering faintly in the lamplight. "I heard them," Ava whispered before Maya could speak. "I heard Mrs. Chamberlain say she doesn't trust you. Please be careful." Maya knelt beside the bed, brushing Ava's hair gently from her forehead. "I will, sweetheart. And so will you. We must be cautious, but we must also be brave. The truth is dangerous, but it is also the only thing that can set you free." Ava clutched her stuffed elephant tightly, nodding with a solemnity far beyond her years. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Not as long as you're here." Those words ignited something fierce in Maya. She was not just fighting for Ava's sight. She was fighting for her childhood, her dignity, her very right to exist outside of Isabella's cruel design. The days that followed blurred into a dangerous dance. Maya continued her duties with precision, her face calm, her posture humble. Even as she quietly documented Ava's moments of vision, she wrote them down in secret, keeping a hidden record of every smile at the sunrise, every step taken without falter, every word whispered about colors and shapes. She added notes from the journal, copying passages that tied the present cruelty to the suspicions of Ava's late mother. Each page of that hidden record felt like a weapon being forged, but with every risk came consequence. Chamberlain's eyes grew sharper, Isabella's temper thinner, and the estate itself seemed to throb with tension. Even Mr. Carter, usually oblivious, began to sense unease. One evening he snapped at his wife in front of the staff, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "The girl looks pale, Isabella, too pale. Are you certain these treatments are necessary?" Isabella's smile was sweet, but her knuckles whitened around her wineglass. "Of course, darling. You mustn't worry yourself with such matters. Leave them to me." Maya caught the flicker in Isabella's eyes then, a glint of desperation, sharp and dangerous. It told her what she needed to know. The puppeteer was beginning to lose control of her strings, and that was the most dangerous moment of all. For when powerful people sensed their grip loosening, they did not simply release. They tightened, they pulled, they burned everything around them if it meant keeping their hold. Maya knew the storm was coming. She could feel it in the cold glances, the whispered conversations that silenced when she entered the room, the way the walls themselves seemed to listen. But she also knew this. Fire, no matter how fierce, could not last forever in shadows. Sooner or later, someone would strike a match and the truth would blaze for all to see. And if no one else dared to light it, then she would. The breaking point. The Carter estate in the late summer seemed like something plucked from a fairy tale. Sunlight drenched the gardens in gold. The fountains sang in delicate arcs of water, and the glass conservatories overflowed with orchids imported from faraway countries. To the world beyond those gates, the Carter family was the image of perfection. Guests who visited left dazzled by the grandeur, whispering with admiration about Isabella's elegance, Mr. Carter's influence, and the fragile innocence of poor blind Ava. Yet to Maya, who lived and breathed the shadows behind those polished walls, the fairy tale had begun to look like a nightmare. Every flower bed seemed manicured to hide graves. Every polished floor a reflection of lies too dangerous to expose to the sun. In the weeks that followed her discovery of Ava's mother's journal, Maya felt the noose of suspicion tighten around her neck. Mrs. Chamberlain, once merely cold and watchful, became almost predatory in her attention. She seemed to appear wherever Maya went, her sharp eyes lingering too long, her tone barbed with unspoken warnings. The other staff noticed as well, withdrawing from Maya with nervous glances, as though her very presence had become dangerous. In a household where survival depended on invisibility, Maya was becoming too visible. Yet the danger only strengthened her resolve. She had seen Ava's world shift with each day away from the eye drops. The girl's pale eyes grew clearer, her steps more confident, her laughter less hesitant. One morning, Maya caught her standing at the window, gazing openly at the sunrise as though she had been starving for the sight her entire life. Tears had streamed down her cheeks, but she had smiled through them, whispering, "It's so beautiful, Miss Maya. I never knew the sky was this big." That moment alone might have been enough to keep Maya fighting, no matter the risk. Still, the closer Ava drifted toward light, the more ruthless the forces of darkness became. Isabella began ordering the drops more frequently, her voice curt when she spoke of them, her manicured hand waving away any questions with icy dismissal. The child must stay on her treatment, she insisted to Mrs. Chamberlain in a tone that brooked no argument. Her condition is delicate. We cannot afford any lapses. There was venom beneath her calm exterior, the sort of venom that came from someone who knew control was slipping through their fingers. One evening, after the staff had retired, Maya heard a cry from Ava's room. She rushed in, finding the girl curled in her bed, clutching her stomach, her face twisted with pain. On the nightstand sat a freshly opened vial of drops, its contents glistening faintly in the lamplight. Ava gasped between sobs. "She made me take them, Miss Maya. She said I had to. Everything's dark again, everything's gone." Her little hands clutched Maya's sleeve desperately, as if holding on to her was the only anchor left in the Black Sea swallowing her vision. Maya gathered her into her arms, fury burning through her veins. She stroked Ava's hair, whispering soothing words, but her mind was a storm of rage. Isabella had forced this upon her, drugging her back into blindness, into dependence. The breaking point was no longer approaching, it had arrived. The following days were a blur of tension and fear. Maya hid the journal more securely, terrified that Chamberlain might discover it during one of her sudden inspections. She watched Ava carefully, noting how the child stumbled again, how her steps lost their newfound confidence, how the light in her eyes dimmed under the drug's cruel haze. It felt like watching a candle being snuffed out, and it tore at Maya's soul. Then one night, Maya's worst fear nearly came true. Ava collapsed in the corridor outside her room, her tiny body trembling, her lips pale. Maya scooped her up and rushed her to her bed, her own heart hammering as if it would burst. She had no medical training, but instinct told her the child's body was rebelling against the poison she had been forced to take. For the first time, Maya thought Ava might not survive this battle. And in that moment, fear transformed into something sharper, Resolve hardened into steel. Maya decided she could no longer rely on patience alone. She had to act and act soon, but how? She was a maid, stripped of power, surrounded by walls thicker than any prison with eyes and ears that reported every movement back to Isabella. She could not simply run away with Ava. Security and the weight of wealth would hunt them down in hours. She could not appeal to Mr. Carter, not yet, because his trust in his wife was ironclad and his attention always fleeting. And the authorities? She had seen enough of how the world bent to the will of the rich to know they would dismiss her word against Isabella's without hesitation. Her only hope lay in gathering evidence strong enough to shatter the illusion, undeniable proof that even Mr. Carter could not ignore. The journal was a start, but it was not enough. She needed the vials tested, she needed witnesses. She needed to pull back the curtain in such a way that the audience could never look away again. That very night, as she tucked Ava into bed, Maya knelt beside her and whispered, "We must be brave, sweetheart. Brave and careful. I need you to trust me, even if things get frightening. I promise you I will not let them win." Ava nodded weakly, her small fingers curling around Maya's hand. "I trust you, Miss Maya. You're the only one who sees me. Really sees me." The words nearly broke her, but they also gave her strength. She rose from the bedside with her mind set. She would begin taking risks, small at first, but calculated. She would slip one of the vials out of the house and find someone, anyone who could analyze its contents. She would quietly document Ava's moments of sight, writing them down in detail. She would search for allies even among the fearful staff, because surely she was not the only one who sensed the rot festering beneath the estate's marble sheen. But she also knew the enemy would not sit idle. Chamberlain was already circling her like a hawk, and Isabella's temper was beginning to crack through her polished facade. One wrong step could bring everything crashing down. As Maya stood in the dim light of her small quarters, staring at the vial hidden in her hand, she realized that she had passed the point of no return. She was no longer just a maid cleaning floors and polishing silver. She was a soldier, fighting in a war that no one else dared to name. And wars, she knew, always demanded sacrifice. Truth behind marble walls, the Hartley estate had always been a place of grandeur. But to Maya, its beauty had begun to feel like a mask stretched too tightly over something rotten. Every corridor gleamed. Every vase overflowed with carefully arranged flowers. Every chandelier glittered as though determined to distract from the shadows hiding beneath. It was a house that demanded admiration, yet the longer Maya stayed, the more she understood that wealth here was not a blessing. It was a prison built out of expectations, lies and secrets. In the weeks that followed her discovery, Maya felt the walls closing in. She noticed details she had once overlooked, each one a thread that unraveled the Carter family's carefully woven story. Ava's room, for instance, was both lavish and suffocating. Shelves filled with expensive toys she was rarely allowed to touch. Racks of pristine dresses in colors chosen not by her but by Isabella, and curtains so heavy they shut out the light even during the brightest days. It was a gilded cage, and Ava, despite her pale smile and polite demeanor, was its captive bird. The girl spoke more freely to Maya now, as though sensing in her the one person who might not betray her. Sometimes, when no one else was around, she whispered her secrets. She confessed that she remembered flashes of her mother, a laugh, a lullaby, the smell of lavender perfume. But more often she confessed her fears. The nights when the drops blurred her vision into blackness, the moments when she doubted her own mind, the way Mrs. Chamberlain's eyes followed her like a hawk whenever she dared to wander too far. One evening, while helping Ava change into her nightdress, Maya noticed a worn, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath the child's pillow. She hesitated, unsure if she should acknowledge it, but Ava saw the flicker of her gaze. With a small, nervous smile, the girl pulled it out and pressed it into Maya's hands. "It was my mother's," Ava whispered. "I'm not supposed to have it. Mrs. Chamberlain says it's only full of nonsense, but sometimes I think it's the only thing that's real." Maya opened the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, notes scrawled in margins, pressed flowers now brittle with age. But among the musings and sketches, certain passages leapt out, entries that spoke of suspicion, of a mother who believed her daughter was not truly sick, but being made sick. One line in particular made Maya's blood run cold. "If anything happens to me, it will not be by chance. Watch the drops. They steal her sight, but not by God's hand, by man's. Her hands trembled as she read. The words confirmed everything she had feared. Ava's mother had known, had tried to protect her child, and had likely paid the price for daring to question the household's queen. Maya closed the notebook quickly, her mind racing. "Keep this safe, Ava," she whispered. "Don't let anyone take it from you, ever." The girl nodded solemnly, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. From that moment on, Maya understood that she was no longer merely a witness. She had become a guardian of the truth, bound by the weight of a dead mother's warning and the living child's trust. But truth was a dangerous weapon, and danger was quick to follow. The next morning, while clearing the breakfast table, Maya nearly dropped a tray when she overheard Isabella speaking with a guest in the parlor. Her voice was warm, sweetened with false charm, but every word dripped with control. "Ava is delicate, poor thing, so fragile. She cannot function without me. She doesn't see the world as we do. That's why I keep everything so carefully ordered. She needs me." Her guest murmured sympathetic approval, but Maya felt the bile rise in her throat. Isabella was not simply deceiving Mr. Carter. She was crafting a narrative for the world, painting herself as the devoted stepmother while tightening the chains around Ava's life. Later that day, while dusting the library, Maya found herself cornered by Mrs. Chamberlain, the woman's sharp gaze fixed on her with unnerving precision. "You've been spending a great deal of time with Miss Ava," she said, her voice low but edged with steel. "That is commendable, of course, but do not forget your place. The Carters do not pay you to meddle." "Curiosity, Maya, is a dangerous thing in this house." Maya forced a polite smile, bowing her head. "Yes, ma'am. I only do what is asked," but her heart hammered in her chest. The warning was clear. She was being watched. One wrong move and she would not only lose her position, but perhaps something far worse. Yet the more she tried to suppress her instincts, the stronger they grew. Each time she looked at Ava, each time the girl's eyes lit up at the sight of something she wasn't supposed to see, Maya felt her resolve harden. She thought of the bruised boy in her past, the one she had failed to protect because she had been silenced too easily. She would not fail again. Her chance to act came sooner than expected. One night, as she passed by Ava's room, she noticed a sliver of light spilling from beneath the door. She knocked softly before stepping inside. Ava sat upright in bed, her small frame trembling, the notebook open on her lap. Tears streaked her cheeks. "They're lying to me, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About everything. About my eyes, about my mother. I'm not crazy. I can see. Sometimes I can see, and I'm not crazy." Maya sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the girl into her arms, rocking her gently as though she were her own child. "You're not crazy, Ava. You're stronger than they know. And yes, they've lied to you, but lies can't last forever. One day the truth will come, and when it does, you will be free." Ava sobbed quietly into her shoulder, clutching her like a lifeline. In that moment, Maya made a silent vow. No matter the cost, she would see this through. For the first time since stepping foot into the Carter estate, Maya no longer felt like a powerless maid. She felt like a warrior standing at the threshold of battle, armed not with wealth or influence, but with truth, and with the fierce determination to protect a child who deserved more than darkness. Still, she knew this war would not be won easily. Isabella was clever and Mrs. Chamberlain merciless, and Mr. Carter, blind in more ways than his daughter had ever been, remained the greatest obstacle of all. Until his eyes were opened, nothing could change. But as Maya extinguished the lamp and tucked Ava beneath the covers, she whispered a final promise in the dark. "I will not let them steal your light, Ava, not while I'm still breathing." And somewhere deep within her, beneath the fear and the scars of her past, Maya felt something stir, something she had almost forgotten she was capable of: hope. The puppet strings. The Carter estate was more than a mansion. It was a kingdom disguised as a home. Every hall was lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, each one staring down with the unspoken reminder that wealth was not earned here. It was inherited, protected, and displayed like a shield. To outsiders, the Carters were the pinnacle of American aristocracy, their empire sprawling across industries from finance to real estate. But within those marble walls, Maya was beginning to see a different truth. It was not grandeur that ruled this family. It was control. Every detail of life in that house was bound by invisible strings, pulled by unseen hands. Maya had worked for wealthy families before, but nothing compared to the Carter household. Here, silence was the air one breathed and fear was the currency. Servants carried themselves with rigid precision, never speaking unless spoken to, never daring to linger in rooms where secrets might be overheard. And at the center of it all stood Mrs. Edna Chamberlain, the house manager whose cold eyes seemed to pierce through stone. Yet Maya knew now that Chamberlain was not the ultimate puppeteer. She was merely the guard dog, the enforcer. The real hand that pulled the strings belonged to Mrs. Isabella Carter, the second wife. Isabella had married Mr. Carter 3 years after the death of Ava's mother, and her arrival had transformed the atmosphere of the estate. Where warmth might once have existed, there was now a sharp, unyielding order. She was beautiful in a polished, icy way. Hair always coiffed, gowns tailored to perfection, her lips painted in shades of crimson that left no room for softness. To the world, she was the devoted stepmother, carrying the burden of raising a blind child with grace. But behind closed doors, Maya had overheard enough to know the truth. Isabella's devotion was not to Ava. It was to the power Ava represented and the fortune tied to her name. Mr. Carter himself was an enigma. He was often absent, consumed by the endless duties of running his empire. When he was home, his presence filled the rooms with a kind of restless energy. Yet he seemed oddly distant from his daughter. He adored her in his way, gifting her toys, books, and dresses that overflowed from her closets. But he rarely lingered long enough to see the hollow look in her eyes or the careful choreography of her movements. In his mind, Ava was fragile, helpless and in need of constant care. And so he entrusted her safety and his household to Isabella and Mrs. Chamberlain. It was in this carefully constructed world of illusions that Maya now found herself entangled. Each day that passed after she switched the vials, she saw more of the truth unravel before her eyes. Without the drops, Ava was beginning to awaken. It was subtle at first, the way she followed the movement of sunlight across the carpet, or the way her eyes flickered toward the clatter of a dropped spoon. Then slowly her steps grew more confident, her posture straighter, as though some invisible fog was lifting, and each time Maya witnessed it, her heart twisted between joy and dread. Joy because she was watching a child rediscover the world she had been denied. Dread because she knew that if Isabella or Mrs. Chamberlain discovered her interference, the consequences would be severe. One afternoon, as Maya folded linens in the laundry room, Ava slipped quietly through the door. She rarely sought out the servants, but today her face carried a strange mixture of curiosity and fear. She stood for a long moment before speaking, her voice low. "Miss Maya," she whispered, "can I ask you something?" Maya set the linens aside and crouched down to meet her at eye level. "Of course, sweetheart." "What is it?" Ava hesitated, glancing toward the door as if afraid someone might overhear. Then she leaned closer. "Do you believe I'm blind?" The question cut through Maya like a blade. For a moment, she could not breathe. She wanted to say yes, to keep the mask intact, to protect them both from the danger of the truth. But the look in Ava's eyes, the searching, vulnerable plea, was too much. Maya reached out, gently brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "I believe," Maya said slowly, "that you are stronger than anyone wants you to know, and that you see more than people realize." Ava's lips parted, a tremor of relief passing over her face. "I knew it," she whispered. "Sometimes I see things. Not always clear, but light, colors, shapes. I've never told anyone because every time I say something, I get more drops. They make the world disappear again, but when I don't take them, everything feels brighter. I feel alive." Maya's throat tightened. She pulled the girl into a gentle embrace, her heart aching with the weight of what she had just confessed. This was not just suspicion anymore. This was truth, spoken from the lips of the child herself. But truth in the Carter estate was dangerous. Later that evening, as Maya carried trays back from the dining room, she paused near the study once again. Voices drifted through the heavy oak door. Isabella's voice, sharp and commanding, rose above the crackle of the fireplace. She must never know. "Do you hear me, Edna? The child must remain in darkness. If she begins to see again, if she learns the truth, she will question everything. And if she questions everything, she will look too closely at the past." "At her mother." "At me." Mrs. Chamberlain's reply was firm, obedient. "The staff suspects nothing. Only the maid, Maya, she watches too closely. I will deal with her if she oversteps. Maya's blood ran cold. She backed away silently, clutching the tray to her chest as if it could shield her from the weight of their words. She knew now, beyond all doubt, that she was dancing on the edge of a blade. One misstep and she would fall. Yet even as fear clawed at her, another thought pushed forward. If she did nothing, Ava would remain a prisoner, her life stolen drop by drop. The child was nothing more than a marionette, her strings pulled by Isabella's ruthless hands, and Maya could not, would not, watch another innocent suffer while she stayed silent. But how could a single maid, powerless and disposable, stand against a woman like Isabella Carter? How could she fight a machine built from wealth, lies, and cruelty? The answer lay not in rushing, but in patience. Just as the puppet's strings were hidden, so too must her rebellion be concealed in shadows. Maya resolved then that she would wait, watch, and gather what she needed. Because when the time came to cut the strings, she would have to strike in a single, decisive blow. That night, lying awake in her narrow bed, Maya stared at the ceiling and felt the walls of the estate close in around her. The Carter mansion was no longer just her workplace, it was a stage, and every person within it a player bound to roles written in secrets and lies. Ava was the puppet, Isabella the puppeteer, Chamberlain the enforcer, and Mr. Carter the blind audience applauding a tragedy he could not see. And Maya, she was the one who had stumbled behind the curtain, seeing the machinery for what it was. The question was whether she had the courage to pull the curtain back for the world to see. Whispers in the dark. The following morning arrived with the usual quiet precision that ruled life inside the Carter estate. Dawn spread across the sprawling lawns in strokes of gold, painting the marble fountains and casting long shadows over the rose gardens. Within the kitchen, the house staff moved briskly under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Chamberlain, who carried her clipboard like a sword and ruled every corner with an authority that rivaled even the Carter family themselves. Maya kept her head down, scrubbing the copper pans until they gleamed like mirrors, but her thoughts were far from the metal in her hands. They were trapped in the vision of Ava's eyes, wide and glassy under the flashlight, unresponsive to light yet undeniably aware. The unease clung to her like a second skin. Every time Ava entered the room, walking with an elegance that did not belong to someone blind, Maya's chest tightened. It was not just the graceful way the girl moved, but the small details others seemed blind to themselves. The way Ava reached for her glass without hesitation, her hand landing perfectly without fumbling, the way she avoided obstacles in her path, subtle sidesteps that should have been impossible for someone who lived in darkness. These were not coincidences. They were not the lucky instincts of a child accustomed to memorizing her environment. They were signs, clear, undeniable signs, yet still Maya said nothing. She had learned the hard way that speaking the truth was not always rewarded. The memory of her last job still haunted her. The bruised little boy, the accusation of meddling, the swift and merciless firing. That same shame still burned, whispering that she was just the help, disposable and powerless. But then she looked at Ava, and a different whisper rose in her heart. If she stayed silent again, what kind of woman would she become? Her answer began to form later that afternoon, when she was sent upstairs to dust the sitting room. Ava sat curled on the velvet sofa, a book open in her lap. Maya paused mid-step, dusting cloth clenched in her hand. It wasn't unusual to see Ava with books. She often carried them, and the staff had been told they were Braille editions, special orders flown in from Europe. But this one was not Braille. The pages were smooth, filled with print. Maya's eyes caught the elegant curve of letters across the open page. Ava's small fingers traced the lines, but not with the slow, searching rhythm of touch reading. Instead, her eyes, those pale, unseeing eyes, moved steadily across the text, following line by line. For a moment, Maya was so stunned she forgot to breathe. Then Ava seemed to sense her, snapping the book shut so quickly it startled the silence. "You startled me," Ava said softly, her voice steady, practiced. I'm sorry." "Miss Ava," Maya stammered, her heart pounding. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Ava tilted her head, her expression blank. "It's fine. I was only imagining the stories. I like to pretend I can see them." Maya nodded quickly, though inside her chest thundered. Pretending. Always pretending. She wanted to speak, to ask the question screaming in her head, but the fear of what it might cost her clamped her lips shut. She turned back to her dusting, forcing her hands to move while Ava sat quietly with the book pressed against her lap like a secret locked in plain sight. That evening, as the staff dined in their small quarters, Maya overheard two maids whispering near the stove. Their words pricked her ears like pins. "Another delivery of those drops came in today," one of them said. "Strange, isn't it? No doctor ever visits, but there's always more medicine. Mrs. Chamberlain says they're for the girl's eyes," the other replied, lowering her voice. "But I've never seen a prescription. Just bottles with those initials. AC." Maya's spoon clattered softly against her bowl. She said nothing, keeping her face carefully blank, but her pulse quickened. The vials. The endless supply of drops. She knew now more than ever that they were the key. That night after the estate had gone to sleep, she returned to Ava's room. She stood in the darkness watching the rise and fall of the girl's small chest, the stuffed elephant tucked safely under her arm. The vial sat once again on the bedside table, catching the moonlight like a shard of glass. Maya lifted it carefully, rolling it between her fingers. The liquid shimmered innocent and cruel all at once. She wanted to smell it, taste it, anything to understand what it was. But the risk was too great. Instead, she slipped the vial into her pocket and replaced it with an identical bottle she had saved from the kitchen pantry, one that had once held plain water. It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but if she wanted answers, she needed proof. The following days were a torment. Maya carried the vial hidden deep in her things, her thoughts constantly circling it like a hawk around prey. She wanted to take it to a doctor, but how? She had no one to trust, no allies in this house of silence. Even so, she watched Ava more closely than ever. Without the drops, something began to shift. The girl's eyes grew less glassy. Her movements, already graceful, grew more confident, as though her vision sharpened with each passing hour. One morning, Maya entered the breakfast room and nearly gasped aloud when she found Ava gazing out the window, her face lit with quiet awe at the garden beyond. It was then Ava turned, her eyes locking directly with Maya's, clear and focused. No longer the clouded orbs of a blind child. The look pierced straight through her, and for a heartbeat Maya saw not a fragile girl but a prisoner breaking free from invisible chains. But Ava said nothing. She lowered her gaze, picking at her toast as if afraid of her own awakening. That night, as Maya made her rounds, she heard voices drifting from the study. She froze outside the half-closed door. Inside, Mrs. Chamberlain's voice hissed in clipped tones. She must continue the treatment. Without it, the illusion falls apart. Do you understand? A deeper voice responded, one she recognized as Mrs. Carter, the second wife, Ava's stepmother. Cold, elegant, and as untouchable as the diamonds she draped herself in. "Of course," the woman replied. "As long as Mr. Carter believes his daughter is blind, he will never question why she is kept apart, why the estate must be managed by me. The girl is a symbol, nothing more, and symbols are easily controlled." Maya's stomach turned. Her knees nearly gave out. She had heard enough. She slipped silently back into the shadows, her breath shallow and quick. The truth was more terrible than she had imagined. Ava's blindness was no accident, no cruel twist of fate. It was a prison built deliberately, brick by brick, with every drop of that vile liquid. And Maya knew then that she stood at a crossroads. She could turn away, bury the truth, and keep her job, her safety, her silence. Or she could fight for Ava, for justice, for the child who deserved more than the darkness forced upon her. Her hands shook as she returned to her quarters, the vial burning like fire in her pocket. The whispers she had heard that night would never leave her. They were chains waiting to be broken, secrets begging for light. And though fear gnawed at her, Maya's heart whispered back, not again, she would not be silent this time. The shattered cup, the Hartley estate stood like a monument to wealth and secrets. Its white marble walls gleamed under the afternoon sun, the long windows reflecting gardens so manicured they seemed unreal. To the neighbors, it was a palace. To those who worked inside, it was a fortress, a place where silence was currency and secrets were locked away behind gilded doors. Maya Williams adjusted the starched, stiff apron that clung to her waist, moving quickly across the kitchen. She had learned long ago that in this house you never lingered, never faltered. The Carter family's fortune stretched across continents, and so did their influence. Servants were replaced as easily as table linens if they displeased the house manager, Mrs. Edna Chamberlain. Still, Maya did her job with diligence. Every polished spoon, every swept floor, every folded napkin was her act of survival. She needed this job. She needed the paycheck. Yet, on that particular afternoon, her world and the carefully built walls around her cracked like porcelain. She had been pouring tea into delicate china cups, the kind so thin you could see light through them when it happened. Her hand slipped. The cup fell. The crash echoed across the kitchen, sharp and violent against the silence. Shards scattered like glass confetti across the polished tile, tea splashing in wild streaks across her shoes. Maya froze, her breath catching. Then her eyes darted upward toward the girl Ava Carter, the billionaire's daughter. 8 years old, pale blonde hair, skin like porcelain, and those unsettlingly pale blue eyes that seemed always unfocused, always searching for something they could not see. Everyone knew Ava was blind. It had been the story whispered through the estate since Maya's first day. The poor child, robbed of sight since a fever at age 2. The fragile angel, but Maya saw it. Before the cup even hit the ground, Ava had moved. Not flinched. Not startled. She had stepped away, smooth and precise, like someone who saw the danger coming. Maya's heart stopped. Her voice slipped out, raw and unguarded before she could stop herself. "She's not blind." The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. Ava froze mid-step, her tiny hands clutching the edge of the kitchen table. For a moment, her pale eyes flickered toward Maya. Just for an instant, but it was there. A glance. A direct, knowing glance. Maya's blood ran cold, and then, "What did you just say?" The voice came sharp and clipped from the doorway. "Mrs. Chamberlain." The house manager's heels clicked against the tile as she stepped in, arms crossed, her face like a thundercloud. She was a tall woman, angular, every hair pinned into place, her eyes sharper than any knife in the kitchen. Maya's throat tightened. She bent quickly to the floor, fumbling with the shards, her hands trembling. I said she's fine," Maya stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded false even to her own ears. "She's not hurt. I dropped the cup, that's all." Mrs. Chamberlain narrowed her eyes. Sounded like something else. Maya shook her head furiously, gathering shards that sliced at her fingertips. She could feel the heat of Mrs. Chamberlain's gaze pressing down on her, judging, dissecting. "Really just an accident," Maya whispered. The silence stretched. Finally, Mrs. Chamberlain sniffed, her lips curling in disdain. "Be more careful, Maya. Mr. Carter values order in his home. Accidents make people uncomfortable." "Yes, ma'am," Maya whispered. When the house manager left, the room felt colder. Maya sat frozen on the floor, her chest tight. Her gaze slid toward Ava, but the girl was already walking gracefully out of the kitchen. Too gracefully, Maya's breath shook. Something inside her, buried deep under years of fear and silence, stirred. That night, long after the estate had fallen silent, Maya stood in the darkened hallway outside Ava's bedroom. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and the faint metallic tang of wealth. Gold frames, silver trays, marble floors. She hesitated. She shouldn't be here. She knew the risk, but the image of Ava stepping away from that teacup haunted her. The glance, the awareness in her eyes. Quietly, Maya pushed the door open. The moon spilled silver light across the room. Ava lay curled on her side, clutching a stuffed elephant, her breath soft and steady. On the nightstand rested a small glass vial of clear liquid. No prescription label. Just the initials AC written in thick black marker. Maya's heart pounded. She pulled a small flashlight from her apron pocket. An old habit from previous jobs, useful when cleaning in dark corners. Her hands trembled as she leaned close. Gently, she lifted one of Ava's eyelids and flicked the light across her pupil. Nothing. No constriction. No reaction. Just wide, glassy dilation. Maya's breath hitched. She tried again on the other eye. Still nothing. The truth struck her like lightning. This wasn't blindness. This was something else. Something done to the child. She stepped back, her chest tight, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the flashlight. Her mind reeled. What kind of family would do this? Why? She looked at the vial again, at the clear drops inside. Her stomach turned. The girl wasn't blind. She was being kept blind. And so begins Maya's battle. The war between silence and truth, between survival and courage. She didn't know it yet, but her whispered suspicion would set off a chain of events that would shatter the Carter family's perfect image and test Maya's strength in ways she had never imagined, because sometimes the greatest darkness doesn't come from losing sight, it comes from the secrets people will do anything to keep hidden.